I'm doing at the moment. Uh, but my impression of this discussion, and because it's a discussion, was that I assume that all of you have read my paper. And in this context, it would be great that we should convert this conversation into a proper discussion, not a lecture sort of thing. Because delivering a lecture somehow reduces the possibility of a dialogue. And I personally feel that there is a need to discuss these issues for better clarity. So I think that it would be great if we have some discussion, more discussion. I would like to speak only very briefly. And then we will have, I think Lubna has raised her hand. Yes, you are saying something.
Lubna, please unmute. I think it might be an accident because she has again unmuted that.
Sure. So this is okay. Fine, Lubna. Thank you. This is my idea that I would briefly touch upon the issues which I have underlined in my paper, and then I would like all of us to think closely about these issues and then have some meaningful discussion. What I really like in this invitation is that you have already read the paper, which is very important because now we have some kind of a basis on which some certain, I would say, a constructive dialogue can take place. So this is something which I personally would like to have. Coming back to this point, I think it would be better if you understand my location. I am basically a researcher. And in my view, the best way to interpret a phenomenon is to carefully get rid of the dominant interpretation that is given to it. In my view, CA and NRC are presented to us as if that these are basically multiple choice question with two options. Either you have to say yes or you have to say no. And either you are with CA or either you are with, CA. Are you a supporter of CA or you're an opponent of CA? I am very critical of CA and NRC, but my criticism are different from the kind of narratives that are revolving around these two issues. So that is the first clarification which I would like to make, that first of all, in order to understand CEA and NRC in their entirety, it is very important for all of us to get rid of the popular interpretation and the binaries that are created to interpret these terms. That is the first thing which actually inextricably linked to my location. Now, the second clarification is about the role of politics involved in it. Obviously, these issues are political, but politics has its own piece. So, as a political study person, I am more interested in the manner in which certain issues are interpreted, presented, and then politically articulated. So I think that the politics of CA and RC reduced everything to two different camps. And this is what I just said in the beginning, that Firoz Saab is saying that there is no sound here. Can you hear me? Can all of you hear me?
Yeah, you're audible. I think the problem is from his side.
Okay, fine. So how to make sense of this politics, which is actually reduce everything to support an opposition to it. Obviously, if phenomena is a social phenomena, it is as a thinking mind, we should have some position on it. But at the same time, carefulness is also required. So these are a few clarifications which I wanted to make in the beginning to make my position clear to you. Uh, Now, the term called Hindutva constitutionalism, it appears as if that I am using a term quite deliberately and quite unknowingly, which is not the case. That I'm fully aware of the fact that what is the meaning of constitutionalism. Obviously, constitutionalism is a positive concept. It is often related to the control of the powers of the state, in a sense that some kind of a check and balance can be established. So in technical sense, constitutionalism refers to the rights people have on the immense powers a state can assert. So therefore, there is a positive meaning of that. Now, again, when I am using constitutionalism with something called Hindutva, it is also important that we also have to unpack what we mean by Hindutva. Most of the time I teach, and I actually find that most of the students start, and not merely students, many senior people and many especially in journalism, the manner we say Hindutva, everything is reduced to Savarkar, and that to his book that he wrote in 1923. In my view, the contemporary usage of the term Hindutva requires some elaboration. And why the contemporary movement has got its own specificity, this is something which we must pay attention to. So these are the two things which, again, in terms of clarification, I wanted to make. So what I will do now, I will share with you two slides in order to make what I mean by these two terms. First of all, Hindutva constitutionalism. So I'm going to share the screen with you. Okay, I think you have to allow me to share my screen.
I will do that. Moment. Junaid, can you allow that?
I have made you co-host. You can now share the screen.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, yeah. So in this slide, I have tried to underline the clarification with regard to these terms. For me, Hindu nationalism or Hindu nationalism or Hindu nationalist are the organization that were ideologically committed to declare India a Hindu nation in the period 1947. But I realized that after first general election, their attitude towards this whole idea of Hindu nation or Hindu Rashtra changed quite considerably. So constitution, I'm not saying that they started worshipping constitution. I'm saying that constitution actually became an important reference point to re-articulate a position which in which Hindu interest can be articulated by these organizations, which actually or which legitimately be called Hindu nationalist. But the term Hindutva is different. It is a political doctrine. Obviously, we all know that V.D. Savarkar, a leader of Hindu Mahasabha, coined this term in 1923 in his book. But this term found a very different political overtone in 1997 when Supreme Court of India described it as a way of life in the famous Bal Thackeray case. The BJP now, it is important. I don't know what is happening at the moment.
Because you have shared the screen, someone has conducting us. I think they have scribbled the screen. Please avoid that.
What should I do?
Just undo that. That's the only.
I can't. This is not done. This is actually disturbing. Anyway, let me just quickly summarize what I was saying. So, as I said in the beginning, BJP, and in fact, before BJP, RSS itself was very critical of the term Hindutva. And if we go back and read Bunch of Thought, we find that Golwalkar was very critical of Savarkar. And he said that we should not directly, but implied meaning of his statement was that it is not an adequate term to express the kind of politics RSS was involved in, the cultural politics which RSS wanted to highlight. So that's the reason why Janasangh and BJP officially did not accept the term Hindutva. Only in later period, I think in late 90s, BJP officially accepted it as its formal ideology without explaining what is the meaning of Hindutva. But at the moment, BJP's constitution doesn't say anything about Hindutva. So Hindutva is not part of BJP's constitution. So we have to remember this. So Hindutva is actually a political metaphor, which is very creatively used. And perhaps that was the reason why RSS chief, Mr. Mohan Bhagwat, conducted three different sessions, whole day sessions, in 2018, 2018, to define or reconceptualize RSS's understanding, or the contemporary RSS's understanding of Hindutva. So we have to remember these things before, or before making any sweeping generalization about it. As I said initially, that constitutionalism needs to be understood in two different ways in Indian context. There is a technical meaning of this term. The norms and principles that not only create state institution, but also impose certain limits and curb on them may be understood as constitutionalism in the broader sense of the term. This is a technical conceptualization of the idea of constitutionalism, which is a positive meaning. But it does not mean that everything, this technical meaning is always used or always interpreted in the same sense by the political parties. In Indian context, we find a political meaning of constitutionalism also evolved over the years. So political parties, all political parties, rely on the language of constitutionalism in the realm of electoral politics. And on the other hand, they continue to evolve ideologically suitable interpretations of the constitution. So on the one hand, they would say that, because remember that in India, you cannot do politics without referring to the constitution. So constitution has always been an important source of politics in India. So therefore, the political parties would adhere to the language of constitutionalism in a way to articulate their agendas, their statements, and the promises they make during the election, etc. But at the same time, they interpret constitution through the prism of their own ideologies. And that's the reason why, and I would recommend you, if you are interested, read a very interesting book written by Jayaprakash Narayan in 1959. And it was actually a critical understanding of Indian constitution. By the way, the worship, we have just this idea that constitution must be treated as a sacred document is rather new, and it should not be reduced to to Narendra Modi or others, because from 1990s onward we started worshipping constitution as if that everything is contained in this document. But in the initial period of Indian politics, constitution, even during the time of emergency, the opposition to emergency was not relying on constitution. Rather, the language of opposition was that we have to protect Indian democracy, not the constitution. So constitution worship is something that is, started very recently. So I was talking about the book, which was written by Jayaprakash Narayan in 1959, and the title of the book is "Plea to Reconstruct Indian Polity," and it is a critical understanding of Indian Constitution. And in my view, that is actually political interpretation of constitutionalism. So in that sense, my argument is that all political parties actually evolve their own meanings of the constitution and constitutionalism. So when I say Hindutva constitutionalism of contemporary time, I mean precisely this, that this is BJP's understanding of the constitution. Many of our friends who are critical of BJP often make a very interesting and I would say misleading argument that BJP is committed to destroy the constitution. I don't see this, I don't see merit in this argument, because if we closely look at the ways in which constitution is interpreted by this new BJP led by Mr. Narendra Modi since 2014, is actually interpreting constitution from the prism of Hindutva in a very interesting way. So this is the background in which I have used the term Hindutva constitutionalism. So I will now share another slide with you to underline the features of the contemporary form of Hindutva constitutionalism. We have to remember, and I think this slide would make my task easier.
Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah.
Once we will reshare the slide again so that we can undo that.
I think it would be better if we do it again. Yeah. So I would just give me 2 minutes. Let me. Yeah. Okay.
You can share your screen now.
Yeah, I can. I'm now going to share my screen with you. Yeah, here we go. So to understand, yeah, there are many people who are waiting. So could you just continue to admit them? Yeah, thank you. It is rather distracting. So now, in order to clarify what I just said, we have to go back to the positions on 4 different issues that were central to the political imagination of Hindu nationalism since 1950s. So first of all, the question of citizenship. Now, if you look at the Hindu nationalist position from 1950 to 1990, you find that the argument that is made by Janasangh and by RSS on number of occasions was simply this, that Hindus have a natural right to claim Indian citizenship. So the emphasis was on the idea of Hindu homeland, or Hindu has got an association with India, so India must be defined in Hindu terms. I'm not saying that this position is changed, but the nature of argument is now different. Now, the Hindutva constitutionalism, if we look at the recent, development, especially with regard to C.A.A., we find a revised argument. And now it is said, if you just go back to C.A.A., it is said that non-Muslim persecuted minorities, including Hindus, of 3 neighboring Muslim majority states must be given citizenship on technical ground. It means now the emphasis that was entirely on Hindu/Muslim is converted and changed into Muslims non-Muslims and Muslims. And in this context, the language of minority and majority is evoked rather intelligently. Now, the second question, which is a very interesting question again, it is with regard to Indian Constitution. If we just go back, as I said, that all political parties, including Congress, were not worshipping the Constitution in the period 1950 to 1990. So that's why when we say that BJP or the Hindu nationalists were critical of Indian Constitution, we must also remember that the communists were also very, very critical of Indian Constitution. Same is the case with socialists. And remember, communists and socialists were the leading opposition parties in the period 1950 to 1980. And even in the 90s, they were a powerful political force. So therefore, when I am saying that in the attitude of Hindu nationalists towards Indian Constitution was debatable in this period, we have to locate that idea in its own context, because all political parties were critical of the Constitution, and including many leaders of the Congress. So if we just focus entirely on Janasangh or BJP, then we find two very interesting development. In the 50s, the emphasis of Hindu nationalist position was either to replace this constitution with a new constitution. And I can cite number of examples, especially if you go back to the 1950s manifestos of Janasangh, you find that there is a lot of emphasis on the idea that this constitution is inappropriate, therefore it must be replaced by something what is called Dharam Rajya. But that is actually changed. That attitude significantly changed in the 90s when BJP for the first time established its own government. And if you remember that in 1999, a committee was constituted to review the working of the constitution under when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the prime minister of the country. So either replace it, amend it, or revise it, meaning that the idea of the Indian constitution was seen as a problem. But this attitude changed considerably in 2014 when Mr. Narendra Modi was declared the prime ministerial candidate for the BJP. And Narendra Modi started his campaign by saying that Indian constitution must be treated as a holy book. So this idea that the constitution must be treated as a holy book is actually a critical and creative reference point to interpret Indian constitution rather differently. This is also true about Article 370 with regard to Kashmir. If we go back to Hindu nationalist position in the period 1950 to 90, we find that Article 370 was seen as a kind of symbol of Muslim appeasement, and the argument was this article actually goes against the spirit of national integration. These 2 points are still there, but the manner in which Article 370 was abrogated is changed, and now a very different sort of, and if you look at the statement made by Mr. Amit Shah and Mr. Narendra Modi, you find that the argument is different. Now, at this time, we have a revised argument. Now it is said that Article 370 was an impermanent temporary provision that was added to the constitution for political purposes by the Congress. And therefore, the second layer of the argument is that it is needed to achieve one nation, one constitution framework. So this is what I am trying to argue, that interpreting constitution to reframing the argument, the political argument. And finally, the question of Hindu nation and Muslims. Remember that in the period 1950 to 90, there was a lot of emphasis to Indianize Islam and nationalize Muslim. Look at all the manifestos of Janasangh and later BJP. You find that there is a lot of noise about Indianizing Islam. But at the moment, Islam and Muslim are treated rather differently. The argument is different. It is said that Indian Muslims enjoy equal rights as minority, and hence offering citizenship to non-Muslim persecuted minorities of Muslim state is legitimate and justifiable. So I think then as I said, that it does not mean that the original ideas were just hold on. I think there is some noise. Yeah, sorry about that. So the point I was making is this, that the attitude towards the attitude, not the attitude, but the formation of argument towards Muslim is also changed. So this is the point I'm making, that Hindu nationalism was something that was there, already there, and still there. But Hindutva constitutionalism is an extension of Hindu nationalism in a very interesting way. And C.A.A, 370, etc., must be seen in the light of this. Now, I would like to share my final slide with you. This is with regard to CEA and the three features which I would like to underline of Hindutva constitutionalism. Yeah. This is the story of CEA, which I hope that you must have seen in my paper. Now, this is the slide which I would like to emphasize, but before that, I would like to underline three features of Hindutva constitutionalism in the light of this discussion. So the first feature of Hindutva constitutionalism is that Constitution is interpreted as a rule book. And when you look at the Constitution as a rule book, you provide certain kind of fixity, meaning that the Constitution is offered to us as if it's a sacred document, and there is no possibility to actually interpret it rather freely. So in a way that there is a distinction that is made between two things. One is the principles contained in the Constitution, and second is the laws based on these principles. Remember that laws are always subject, like principle, laws are always subject to multiple interpretation. But in case of the principles of the Constitution, you have, because these principles are, quite open and quite comprehensive. So therefore, a very different interpretation of the Constitution is provided, in which Constitution is seen as a rule book that is fixed and that cannot be changed at all. So that's the impression that is given to us. That's the first thing. If you look at all the discussions around C.A.A, 370, etc., you find that Constitution is produced as if that it's simply a rule book. Now, the second feature is that unlike many of our friends who are critical of BJP and Narendra Modi, they would say that they are doing the politics of majoritarianism. I don't think this is the case, because there is a lot of emphasis on the idea of minority. Because if you look at there, and many of you are actually lawyers, so you know more than what I know, that there is a court case pending in the Supreme Court, where the idea in 9 states how to declare Hindu population a minority, and there is another court case by a member of BJP, and the argument is that despite the fact that Hindus are in majority in this country, their powerlessness, and therefore the 1993 National Commission for Minorities Act must be revisited and must be, repealed. So that there is a lot of emphasis on the question of not the majority but the minority. And if you closely look at the formation of CEA, you also observe this, that CEA is also revolving around the idea of majority and minority. So therefore, instead of majority, the emphasis of Hindutva constitutionalism is on the idea of minority. And finally, and this is a point which I've just made, the emphasis is on one nation, one constitution. So these are the three features of Hindutva constitutionalism. My final slide is about this. And I hope that you must have seen this, the detailed elaboration of these arguments in my paper. If we just go back to and make a distinction between two things. One is the legal technical justification given by the government to joint parliamentary committee that was constituted in 2017 to when this bill was first introduced. It was sent to the joint parliamentary committee. And the proceedings of these joint and the report of this joint parliamentary committee is very significant because when these questions, these were actually these four questions are technical questions, and these technical questions became political question only when CEA actually CAB became CAA, meaning when bill got accepted by the parliament and by the president and it became a law. And what is interesting is that the government actually responded rather differently to JPC, gave only technical justification for this move. But when it comes to political argument, things changed. So in this table, I am making a distinction between the legal technical justification given by the BJP government to JPC, Joint Parliamentary Committee, and second is that what kind of political arguments are made by BJP leaders in support of CEA when CAB became a law. So the first question was why only 3 Muslim countries were selected. The government said in JPC that state is empowered to invoke reasonableness to make laws for a set of people. And it also said that refugees coming from other countries, including Muslim from these 3 countries, may apply through the standard SOP system, meaning the standard procedural system. So they are saying that, we have not stopped other refugees to come. They have to follow the different route. And it is possible and it is already legally justifiable to make a few laws with regard to a set of people. So Supreme Court has to decide whether this interpretation of law is correct or not, but this is the technical argument given by the government. But if you compare this technical argument with the political arguments made by the BJP leaders, we find 2 very provocative arguments. The first argument was that Hindus have only one country on earth to look for, while Muslims have over 60 countries to take shelter. And second is we are giving citizenship to the minorities who are religiously persecuted, yet it won't affect the citizenship of Indian Muslims. So therefore, these 2 arguments, are very different from the technical arguments given to JPC. The political leader could have used this argument in order to make a very polite acceptance of the fact that fine, that say for instance, Muslims are also welcome, but they have to take a different route. But this different route issue does not come into picture. By the way, it is very important to recognize that CEA is not merely about Muslims. It actually about 6 minority communities of 3 neighboring countries. and these countries are eventually Muslim dominated. That's the reason why the second question became very important. And this question was also raised by the members of JPC. The question was how to determine religious persecution in a foreign land. Now, three very interesting arguments were given by the government. It is said that no one gets automatic citizenship. It depends on IB reports and other documents, etc. So the burden to provide evidence that a person has faced religious discrimination in his or her own country of residence is on him or her. So the IB has to evaluate his or her claim. So, and the second thing is that the 5-year time is required for these people to get Indian citizenship, while for others it is 11 years. And finally, the Home Ministry also said that they are preparing a new SOP to deal with the question on case-to-case basis. Now, if we just look at and compare these explanations to the political argument made by by BJP leaders, we find a different picture. It is said that it is a well-known fact that the non-Muslim face religious discrimination, etc., and therefore we would go and give them citizenship as if that the citizenship to these people is providing on their arrival. This is not the case. So if we just broadly look at CEA again in the light of this discussion, it is clear that CEA is actually an anti-Hindu law because it is making a person, especially Hindu, coming from neighboring countries, stateless for at least 5 years. And there is no guarantee that after these 5 years, he or she would be able to get Indian citizenship. The rest two arguments, the rest two questions, we all know about that, and I don't think that we need to discuss them in detail. The third question was, is it anti-Muslim? The government said that legal technical justification was given to this, that no, it does not contradict with Article 14 and Article 25. While if we look at the political argument, there is a famous statement made by Mr. Amit Shah. He said that chronology samajhiye, that CAA would be followed by NRC, NPR, etc. throughout India, meaning that he actually categorically presented CAA as an anti-Muslim law. Finally, the Assam Accord. And this is the most delicate and the weak argument which is given to the JPC by the government. And it said that CA deals only with these minorities, not all illegal migrant, and it does not contradict with inner line law that is there. So the complication, this is the weak argument, I would say. And that's the reason why politicians, BJP politicians, continue to adhere to the argument that they are committed to protect the regional and national identity of Assamese people. So I think this is a good example to interpret these, this contradiction between legal technical justification given to JPC and the political argument made by the BJP leaders. It is apparently clear to us that how Hindutva constitutionalism actually functions. So I think I stop here, and this is what I initially thought that I would share with you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. So we are open for the question answers or with regard to the opinion. So let me start for the first. From your own paragraph, you mentioned that the Muslim communities who are often treated as religiously inward-looking and politically untrustworthy seems to reassert the point that their Muslimness is an inseparable part of their Indian identity. So here the inseparable part to your to the Indian identity, is that much reflected in the constitution that was implemented on 26 January 1950? If you say that the Muslims are inseparable part to the Indian identity, how do you imagine this inseparable part of the Muslimness to the Indian identity in the context of Indian constitution and how it is wiped out, or how it will be engaging with the term of Hindu nationalism?
No, let me clarify what I mean by that paragraph. Uh, my argument is simply this, that and this is my actually approach to understand any political phenomenon. I am not interested in what ought to be. I'm interested in what is. And when it comes to what is, for me, the contemporary is an important reference point. So for me, in what ways Muslim identity is interpreted in the realm of the present, and then I would actually trace the genealogy of that construction over the years. So in that context, that very paragraph was written. But I don't understand your question in its entirety. Could you just repeat the question? Because somehow I missed that. It is not clear to me.
The imagination that their Muslimness is inseparable part of their Indian identity.
Mm.
So if what defines the Muslimness? Is that Article 25 or Article 29, or is that something beyond that is being discussed here in the name of Muslimness?
No. The Muslimness is not a defined phenomenon. Muslimness is something that is given to us, and all, because my focus, at least in this paper, is entirely on the political use of the category called Muslim. For me, in what ways different political formation interpret Muslimness, and in what ways they came out with their own formulation. So that's the reason why why I categorically emphasized, and in fact, because of the focus of the paper was Hindutva constitutionalism, I tried to look at in what ways Hindutva actually defines Muslim. And if I may add to this, because that's not part of this paper, in my book Siyasi Muslim, there is a chapter on Hindutva as Muslim, and I actually looked at 19 different questions that are often asked to Muslim to answer. And my argument is that even, because the nature of Hindutva politics, there are two features of Hindutva politics we must realize. One, its unsettling nature. And second, it reliability on anti-Muslim discourse. So these two things we must remember. First, that Hindutva's reliability on, because that's the reason why they cannot produce a positive interpretation of India or even Hindu religion. So their reliability on anti-Muslim discourse is so high, and precisely that is actually used to have some very interesting surprise issues, like the recent hijab thing. So in my view, that's the larger argument I'm making in this case, is this, that the focus of this paper was how Hindutva interpret Muslim, and therefore in what ways Muslimness is defined through the prism of Hindutva constitutionalism.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So moving on to the paper, that is the last paragraph that you have discussed about the anti-CA protest and a kind of a criticism that was there, which says that they rely on the argument that the Indian Constitution is a self-explanatory political text, and its secular character is protected and unquestionable. This over-reliability of the Constitution as a source of politics is problematic. So when I was reading this specific criticism of yours, I went back directly to the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's discussion with regard to the Congress opposition to the Pakistan in his book Partition of India, wherein he specifically criticizes the Congress position with regard to the unification of India, and he says that reliability of the Congress on the central government, just because having a central government will not form a unified India, there are some other forces that will be defining. And further, he provides a criticism to the Government of India Act 1935, wherein he says that demanding a unification based on document as such is a paper unity. So is this paragraph of yours, can we read in that context, that Ambedkar was discussing about the Congress and Muslim League? And how do you see the present Muslim and Hindutva discussion?
Actually, let me just clarify what I mean by that. I think that the imagination that constitution is something that would protect itself is a problematic proposition for me, because after all, constitution is open to multiple interpretation. So certainly anti-CAA movements evoked a very different and very positive interpretation of the constitution, which I also like. But reducing everything to the constitution as if that you need not to have any political morality, I think that's a problem, and it is linked to what Ambedkar said. But by the way, for me, Ambedkar, Gandhi, Bhagat Singh, these are great figures. They have played their role. They are our reference point. But again, reducing everything to them is a problem in my view. These are our questions. Ambedkar can be helpful to interpret them to some extent, but we have to actually go back and then work out our own answers to these problems. I'll give you one example. Idea of India. Everyone in India is these days talking about idea of India. But whenever you ask them their idea of India, they would celebrate Nehru, Gandhi, Ambedkar, etc. Basically the opponent of BJP. And look at BJP's position. Their idea of India is reduced to, say, for instance, Dindayal Upadhyaya and things like that. And then some kind of Ambedkarism, some kind of, now Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, etc. So therefore, it appears to me that there is an intellectual decline. And this intellectual decline is affecting our politics. We do not have any dream to have a good society. These are moral political questions. And since we are intellectually weak, so we actually go back and reduce everything to the national movement or Ambedkar or Gandhi. I think Gandhi, as I said, Gandhi and Ambedkar are important figures. They certainly provides us great resources. But in order to understand these resources in our own context is something that is desperately needed. And in this context, I was critical of the ways in which constitution was reduced to some kind of a self-explanatory book by many of the participants of anti-CAA movement. Your second point is a comprehensive, and it's a very broad point. And it requires, I think that it is very difficult to answer this question in a few sentences. But I think that, as I said, in fact, I have answered this, that these two features of Hindutva politics, one is its unsettling nature, and second is its reliability on anti-Muslim discourse. We must, need to be taken very seriously. We must remember that these two features always empower Hindutva politics to come out with certain surprises. And this is the reason why, if you look at, because others they do not have any kind of a constructive proposal for reconstituting Indian polity the way, say, for instance, JP was arguing in the 50s. So there are a lot of problems with us. And the impression which we get when we criticize BJP or when we criticize Narendra Modi, the impression that is coming from these criticism is very reductionist, as if that we are saying that Congress rule was better than the BJP rule. So I think if we want to expand the scope of our criticism, it is very important for us to be critical to the processes and the structure that has led to the present stalemate of politics.
Thank you. Mustafa, you can unmute yourself.
Good evening, sir. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the part with which you said that discussion would be the major part of this dialogue. Yeah. So I have a couple of questions with me. Two are theoretical, one is legal, and one is a more practical one. So I'll begin with the strand that you left in the previous answer. You said that there are contestations around the constitution. The constitution is not set in stone. People are contesting what it means. There are interpretations, there are reinterpretations going on. And to use that as, say, a sacred, inviolable book is not the right approach. So when we are striving for having our politico-cultural space, if constitution is not the anchor that we hold on to, then what is left? So my perspective is coming from the fact that in the anti-CAA protests, constitution was perhaps the only reliable anchor you could hold on to and put forward your views. Because if that is not held on to with the kind of steadfastness, then we have to use, when we cannot use a religious appeal, we cannot appeal to morality, because those things are more fluid, whereas constitution is at least more solid and at least like a negotiated agreement. So if I may put my question in this sense, that if constitution is not an inviolable anchor to fix ourselves to, then what else can be?
Wait, can I answer this now and then I'll move to your second question?
Sure.
I didn't say that we should not, evoke constitution in order to make arguments. Obviously, constitution is an important reference point. So we have to make a distinction between thinking of constitution as a reference point and a reductionist approach to constitution, as if that every answer will be found in the constitution. I am actually critical of the latter. For me, constitution is a reference point, obviously. But if it is a reference point, then again, Ambedkar would become very important. Ambedkar's argument is that in what ways a different kind of political morality can be constituted. No one is talking about the political morality, the new political morality. Everyone is reducing everything to the constitution, and that too giving the wrong impression, as if, and in my presentation also I have made this point, that as if that BJP is instrumental in getting rid of this constitution. So my point is, please recognize what BJP is actually doing. They are interpreting, they are engaging with the constitution. You get my point?
Yes, sir.
They are actually engaging with the constitution. The others are not engaging with the constitution. They are reducing everything to this. I'm critical of this reductionism. One. Second is, I'll give you the example of emergency. Now go back to the, during the time of emergency, the parliament was also functioning. And if you look at the discussion, and especially in 1977, when Janata Party won the election, what was their argument? What was JP's argument in opposing Indira Gandhi? No, they were not reducing everything to the constitution. Their argument was democracy, protect democracy and the morality of democracy. And that's why total revolution idea of JP was actually going beyond constitution and providing an engagement. Again, in his book, in 1959 book, JP didn't say that we need a new constitution. He said, this, let it be, this constitution is fine. But what we really need is to look at the structure and the practices of Indian democracy. And only then we would be able to expand the scope of our criticism. That's it. That is my point. What is the scope? Then I will give you another example. This is my second example. That if we take constitution as a reference, look at, we did survey during that time. And two very interesting findings actually came up. One finding was that during that time when anti-CAA thing was happening, we asked this question, and this is actually a very famous question. India belongs to whom? And
I've seen
all
those
the
figures,
surveys, all the surveys, everybody would say India belongs to all, etc. While at the same time, we find a mixed opinion on C.A.A. What does it mean? It means the failure of people like us to reach out those who still believe that India belongs to all. So that is my criticism. It is actually an important. So if we interpret constitution as a reference point and not reduce everything to the constitution, then a new engagement will emerge. I'm not saying that I have got all the answers, but this is my vantage point. It allows me to see, what is not said in the public sphere.
Yes, sir. So actually, my next question was partly answered, where it would have been, what are the other reference points we can appeal to? And like you said, there's democracy, there is even morality itself.
And by the way, one more important aspect, that is economy, the political economy. See, we are witnessing the extreme brutality of capitalism at the moment. And the moment we say capitalism, things actually changed and everything reduced to communist parties. No, we need to see how in this second phase of liberalization, things are happening and in what ways things are actually concentrating in few hands. And that's the reason why a political economy approach is also needed to expand the scope of this criticism.
Yes, sir. Sir, in this context, what role can appealing to UN Declaration of Human Rights and other bodies apply? I'm asking because in the Kashmir issue, we did not appreciate the fact that we wanted to go to international bodies.
Nothing would happen. See, international bodies would only function when you have something called world opinion. In the 40s and 50s, we had this concept of world opinion. Now look at what has happened to various human rights, various commissions constituted by UN. Because the international political morality has also declined rather tremendously when Mr. Trump was the president of the United States. So in this context, I think the world opinion, and that's why the alternative to alternative world opinion, people to people contact, people to people diplomacy, these things need to be highlighted. Look at what Indian representative said the other day in the UN. He said that Hindu phobia must be recognized. In relation to Islamophobia, his argument was that Sikh phobia and anti-Hindu phobia must be recognized as phobia in order to fight against terrorism. Now, I don't understand the logic behind this. This is actually coming from what I called Hindutva constitutionalism, interpreting the existing legal frame in order to legitimize the argument in favor of Hindutva politics.
Yes, sir. So another strand that I wanted to touch upon is the very idea of Hindutva constitutionalism. I have been seeing in the past 2 years, commentators on the right talk about the constitution itself being a dharmic document. In particular, J. Sai Deepak and Subramanian Swamy have on various fora like the Earth Cultural Festival expanded on this doctrine that the constitution is a dharmic document. They have been speaking of dharmic exceptionalism, and this ties in with what you have mentioned in your article as well, that the earlier concept of the state, then Mohan Bhagwat preferring the idea of a nation, and now most recently calling it a civilization, कि ये हिंदू सभ्यता की बात हो रही है, ना कि किसी देश की. So the shift from state to nation to now a civilization and reinterpreting the constitution as a dharmic document, in this setup, how can Muslims see themselves placed within it? And what is the best bargain that we can have out of it?
See, as I said in the beginning, I always make a distinction between what is and what ought to be. So part of what is, I have explained in my paper, and you have rightly pointed out the extension of the argument which I am making in my paper. The second part of your question is related to something which I hesitate to answer, because in my view, this is something which we all have to sit down and think closely and think about it. So there is no one way out in which we can think of these issues. But for me, I think the best possible, there are a lot of resources available to us, but the opponent of BJP and Narendra Modi, they are reducing everything to the criticism of BJP and Mr. Modi, as if that, suppose if BJP lose election, everything would be worked out perfectly. I don't think that this is going to happen. In my view, we need to actually interpret this question as a reflection of a systemic failure of Indian polity. And this systemic failure require some mechanism to address them. And that's the reason why, as I said, that constitution should be treated as our reference point. And if we establish an engagement with the constitution as a reference point, certainly many new things would come to us.
So my fear in this, in the only approach we have possibly, is that at least in 1947, we were sitting on the table as equal negotiators on equal terms. Right now, because of the political inequality, renegotiating and reinterpreting this, we are
Who
not
is
equal on the
we, by
table.
the way? Who is
Uh,
we? Who
I'm
is
speaking.
we?
I'm speaking of all marginalized groups here, sir. It could be Muslims, could be
That's
Christians,
the
could be
problem.
Dalits.
No. That's the problem. That is actually the problem. Let this we to be redefined. Because when we say marginalized people, when we say, we assume, and I can give you a number of different examples to, to say that this imaginary unity of different identities is problematic until and unless we look at the formation of their elite and their cooperation. So most of the time, whenever we say Dalit Muslim unity, etc., it is not unity between two very deprived section of society. Rather, it is a unity between the leaders of these two deprived sections. So therefore, I think that it would be better if we expand the horizon and again these categories that are available to us. This idea of marginalization need to be. I'm not denying the significance of what you are saying. I'm saying just unpack this idea of the margin, like the Bahujan. I think we need to revisit this idea again. I am not very sure that this we which you are referring to is there and it exists the way you are describing.
Point taken, sir. My last question is more
So
on the
many questions by you. You are not giving any opportunity. This is not democratic, Mustafa.
Sure, sir. I can hand over it to others who want to ask.
No. Please go ahead. I'm just joking. Please go ahead. I'm
Yes, sir.
enjoying your question. Please.
My last one is more practical, sir. Experience has shown that going by the statements and the speeches of the RSS leaders and other Hindutva ideologues, the statements might be sugar-coated, speeches might be tailored for acceptability. But actually, what lies behind them and the intent, the practical consequences, they are the most threatening aspect of that. So, well, CAA has its legal justifications. It may even pass, who knows, the court's scrutiny to some degree, if not in its entirety. But the practical consequences of that, what would that entail for people who would be the targets of this strategy, sir?
I think for me, I am a great fan of Gandhi Satyagraha, and you may find it impractical, but I think Gandhi has got a very interesting point. He would say that we need to get rid of this mentality of victimhood and then interpret any particular thing in its entirety with relation to the social effect it would have. For instance, perhaps I am the only person who is raising the issue that this is unfortunately the first refugee law in the country. The CAA is actually the first refugee law in the country, in our country. And despite the fact that it's a refugee law, it is making a person 5 years stateless. So it means it's anti-Hindu. So if I can say with full confidence that this is actually an anti-Hindu law, why can't opposition party say this? I don't understand. So I think that, as I said, that you have read my paper and very carefully, and I'm really thankful to you that you have asked all these questions. In my view, the larger impact of any particular law or the larger impact of any particular set of policies must be addressed as national concerns, not the concern of those who are affecting with this. So therefore, look at, I really like the way in which certain experiments done by this new BJP. For instance, Swachh Bharat. Aam Aadmi Party came out with Jhadu, and BJP appropriated it very creatively by saying Swachh Bharat. So this enthusiasm to capture resources is something that is there. Lot of resources are here, but you have to just open your eyes and think creatively. That's the only option.
I think my question was more like the Citizenship Amendment Act in itself perhaps is not going to disenfranchise current Muslim citizens of India.
No,
But
look
like,
at the no. I think you missed the section on NRC, which
yes, sir, I'm
is there
exactly referring to that.
in my thing,
Yes, sir.
that this CAA
The
NRC thing.
combination.
Look at the combination.
Yes, sir.
The combination is opposed by opposition in a very strategic way. So that's why they would also like to have CAA, but not NRC.
Yes, sir.
And in some respect, certain NRC, not CAA. So I think that combination must be seen in ways in which we cannot deny the significance of position at all. So I think that, again, as I said, that I don't know what will happen in the future. But suppose if this is the possibility, then look at the different the position of non-BJP parties.
Thank you very much, sir, for addressing my questions.
Thank you very much for these very, very provocative questions.
Asif?
Yes. Hello. Um, Very nice discussion so far. So, my question is regarding the 2016 amendment to include Afghanistan to the CA list, the passport entry into India rules 1950, the amendment that happened there. So, um, previously the argument that people tried to construct is that these are partition countries. So basically, there are Hindus, minority Hindus in Pakistan and Bangladesh who are suffering because of partition for a long time, and they need to be need refugee status. Now, when they included in 2016 the Afghanistan and didn't included Myanmar or Sri Lanka, where also Muslims were being tortured and killed and displaced, and their lives, livelihoods, and lives and women were raped. This is dangerously anti-Muslim to the core. Now, the funny thing is, JPC in 2016 probably accepted this uh, thing, right? In 2016 itself, if I'm not mistaken, the Joint Parliamentary Committee, and how the committee was constituted and why did it allow the Afghanistan to be included? Was there any debate? How this can be possible?
Can I ask? I got your point, Asif bhai. But did you read my paper?
Yeah.
Did you read my paper?
Yes.
think,
Especially the tables.
Not only tables, but the paper.
Yeah, some of the things.
Yeah, please, please read my paper first, because in my paper, I have answered this question. There are two aspects of it, the political aspect and the technical aspect. The political aspect is something which you are underlining, and I agree with you. But the technical justification given by the government to JPC, and by the way, whenever a JPC is constituted in the parliament, the views of the ruling party would prevail. This is actually a normal thing in the parliamentary democracy. The committee system works this way. So let me just go back to the technical justification given by the government to include Afghanistan. There were two justifications. One was that obviously India does not recognize POK. India does not recognize POK, and it is always seen as part of India. So if that is the case, technically, Afghanistan would become our neighbor. That is one thing. Second, the role of Haqqani network in Afghanistan is always also seen as a threat. And if you go back to the Ministry of Home Affairs and Ministry of External Affairs annual report, and even Ministry of Defense's annual report, and I'm not talking about post 2014, I'm talking about before that. I did some work on these official interpretation of national security. You find that actually threat from Afghanistan is something that is always interpreted as a concern for national security. So the government gave these justification to include Afghanistan. But remember that to JPC, they did not say that the Muslims who are killed by Rohingya Muslims that were killed in Myanmar, etc., are or cannot apply, they cannot come to India. Technical, I'm just saying their technical justification, not the political statement made by BJP leader when the Rohingya crisis happening in India, when many of the Rohingya people were coming to India. So this double standard is something which need to be highlighted. My task in this paper was to highlight this double standard. Technically, you are saying that is fine, that we are in principle recognizing the discrimination on the basis of religion in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, etc. And these are not my words, by the way. These are the words of the government representative noted in the JPC. That is one. Second, when it comes to politics, you are actually provoking and you are representing the entire thing as an anti-Muslim, to contribute to anti-Muslim discourse. So I think if we just show these two things, we are so quick to reduce everything to their politics. But what I'm saying is just be calm, look at the nature of argument and produce something concrete. Only then your argument would be accepted and your argument would have certain kind of capacity to mobilize those who actually are floating from here and there. Remember that there is a lot of resentment against the government in the country at the moment because of economic distress, but no one is actually in a position to translate that resentment in order to actually replace the government, because government is so quick to respond to, not through brutality but the management part of it. So therefore my point is that this distinction, because we are basically researcher, we are not politician, we are not going to contest election. So recognizing this limitation, our task is to be critical and produce the arguments which may have certain direct political manifestations.
Yeah, one more point to that. In Assam NRC, there were some people who some people were considered, um, applied for citizenship proof, and they were almost included in the list of citizens. But some people of the village or somewhere doubted their citizenship, and more court cases happened. This kind of things happening. In NPR, for example, you already know that there is a provision of doubting anybody's citizenship, and the citizen it's himself or herself has to prove that he or she is a citizen. So these stressful provisions that they're including in NPR, NCR, and CA, they are basically, if they selectively applies them, the problem is when they selectively applies them based on religion without technically calling it religion, with that technically calling that will only apply this, our bureaucracy only apply using the names whose citizenship is being doubted, then then the apartheid kind of structure is arising. So my question is that even in the technicality, the level of implementation, the level of implementation in different stages, not just in the first stage, in the second stage, third stage, when it is going to the court, when it is going to the final police, the case is going to the police is finally coming, jailing them, the way they are torturing Muslims versus others, but using the same technical definition. So at each stage there is a ambiguity of uh, how do you interpret the laws or rules or regulations, and they're using that to their benefit. How to counter that? Like theoretically, you say
Now
that,
this is the point. I think I have already answered this question. Now, how to counter it, meaning in what ways? We can counter it to highlight this is precisely what you are saying. If you make this point as powerfully as you just made, this is actually also a counter argument. But remember one thing, And this is important. And I don't know whether I am actually able to communicate with a certain amount of clarity or not. But this is my firm belief that if you, and when I refer back to Gandhi and Satyagraha, one of the conditions with Gandhi underlines with regard to Satyagraha is to actually expand the scope of an issue, that it is not entirely related to those who are the victim of this, in this case, Muslims. So if we reduce this thing that this is going to affect to us, the Muslims, then it will become the Muslim issue. What is needed is that we must articulate this issue as a crisis of national identity. And this is something which require a new political morality. See, I cannot give you any practical solution to this. I am deeply concerned about what you just said. I completely agree with you. But my way of looking at it is different from your way. I would actually look at it in order to provide not an answer to this or to counter it. Rather, I would be more interested in making an issue for the entire nation, not for the segment who is being targeted. So, if what are the ways that, so again, it is a question of stance. It is a question of vantage point. From my vantage point, I can see that this issue of targeting Muslim or creating anti-Muslim discourse is not specifically related to Muslim. It has got various ramifications, various implications for the entire country. Now, in what ways we have to articulate that position, if you agree to that, I would be happy to talk about it. But if you want me to actually reduce everything to the narrative of Muslim victimhood, I'm sorry that if you say that this is the question only related to Muslims, then remember, at the moment, yesterday I delivered another lecture on competitive victimhood. Remember, Hindutva politics is surviving not because of its assertion of majoritarianism. It is surviving because it has emphasized on what I call competing victimhood, meaning that Hindutva victimhood is highlighted as if that despite the fact Hindu, they are in a majority, they are the victim. Now, you have to counter that narrative in order to make people understand the kind of argument you are making.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Khamar?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Assalamu alaikum, sir. Sir, my question is related to the terminology of Hindu and Muslim used. You said that in the secular constitution, while framing, they tried and they excluded the words Hindu and Muslims and Sikhs. But Hindu constitutionalism is trying, or the BJP is trying to use terminologies such as Hindus and Muslims in these. They want they want to bring these terminologies into the debate or in the technical terms. So, what is the motive behind it, and why they want to want to use words?
No, I think I have to. I think again, we should not reduce everything to the BJP or the contemporary, because this, recognizing a religious group as legitimate stakeholder in the official constitutional discourse is not a new phenomenon. It started in 1991-92, when for the first time, remember in 1993, when probably for the first time, five religious communities were declared as national minority. And remember that constitution does not define who is the majority and who is the minority. So when you have got five different communities at the national level, and remember that Supreme Court in many cases categorically said that a minority should always be determined at the level of the state, not at the level. There cannot be a national minority. So this process started in 1993, and What is interesting is that religious minorities were separated from cultural minorities, and that's the reason why everything actually minority, the term minority is rather problematic. As I said, constitution does not does not define the term minority, right? Rather, constitution evokes what I call impermanent imagination of minority. So in that context, it was this process started in 1993 when five and then later six religious communities were identified as national minorities. So if you have technically, officially six national minorities, then the question would be, what is left? Which one is a national majority? Obviously Hindu. So this Hindu-Muslim terminology is not introduced by the BJP. This process started 30 years ago. And the culmination of this process is something which we are witnessing at the moment. So what BJP is actually doing, the contemporary BJP, they are extending the scope of the argument made in the 90s. So I think that, as I said, that reducing everything to BJP is wrong, because the use of Hindus and Muslim as legitimate political stakeholder in the official discourse is not new. It started long back. By the way, I think I can see that many of you may find my position and my explanation less convincing. But I am actually very critical of political correctness. I do not want to take a politically correct position. Rather, I would like to have more, more fresh thinking in order to go beyond the stalemate, the political stalemate we witnessing at the moment.
Thanks, sir. With regard to the constitutional engagement that you are speaking about, in that view, we are having a number of issues that are there, not just related to Muslims, but also to that by default they come into the definition of Hindu just because they are not a Muslim, they are not a Christian, they are not a Jew or Parsi. So in view of that, the people have challenged that scheduled caste order of 1950, which is somewhere tries to break this stalemate. And now how do you see that if that legal issue is taken up, will that bring a new political or constitutional discussions? Is that what you're talking about, constitutional engagement?
No. I think if you are interested in taking constitution as the reference point, I think one great thing that is there in the constitution and that is completely ignored is the idea of welfareism. Remember that Indian constitution is an outcome of a national movement, and the issues which we find in the constitution were deeply debated for say at least 30 years. And then finally the culmination point was the Constituent Assembly debates. Now in that sense, that the idea of national identity of India that evolved rather systematically was something that it had its own history. But in 1990, and this is the larger picture which I'm offering, I'm not reducing, I'm not picking and choosing, issues that are inextricably linked to Hindu-Muslim divide, etc. I'll come back to your point later, but this point is very important to recognize. That in 1991, we decided that the state decided, we meaning the state, Indian state decided to actually roll back from the idea of welfareism. And at that point, a sectoral approach to affirmative action was established. And according to this sectoral approach, every segment of society would be addressed and a new discourse of inclusion and exclusion would be established. So Muslim, women, Dalit, Adivasi, and things like that. So the so-called marginalized community, I'm saying so-called marginalized communities because their marginalization is imposed on them as if that their identity is the basic issue around which this whole discourse of marginalization is important, and therefore this sectoral dimension need to be highlighted and answered accordingly. So then in the next 20 years, we find that various commissions were set up, and the elite of these segments or these sectors were appeased. Now, the outcome of this was that it actually empowered the Hindu nationalist politics in a way to argue that there is an appeasement, the politics of appeasement, and the non-Hindus or the so-called marginalized are the beneficiaries of this. In this context, this idea of reservation must be revisited. So I'll give you one very concrete example. 70% of state jobs has, suppose, what is the nature of our affirmative action, and especially with regard to reservation. And in my view, I think we should not reduce every policy of which is related to affirmative action to reservation. But if we just broadly look at what is the nature of affirmative action in India, one, that the communities, the backwardness is always described in secular terms, meaning that if you look at the official discourse, Hindu, Muslim, Dalit, these terms are not used. Rather, we have got SC, ST, minority, and then OBC. These are the categories. These are official templates which are distinct from the sociological categories. That's the first thing. Second thing is that affirmative action is time bound. Third thing is that after getting affirmative action of some kind, these communities are to be evaluated. And finally, there is an exit policy that after they are empowered, they must get out so that the new communities and the new group can come in and take the benefit of affirmative action. Now, in this scenario, there is nothing. If we just go back to 1990 moment, we find that on the one hand, the state is saying that expand the scope of reservation. While on the other hand, there is no discussion on the reservation in the private sector. There is no discussion to expanding the scope of the jobs that are available within the state sector and things like that. So on the one hand, you are reducing the jobs. On the other hand, you are actually expanding the scope of reservation. So this would create an imbalance. So the SC, obviously, the 1950 order is obviously, in my view, it's a communal order. But suppose that communal order, suppose that Muslim Dalits and Muslim and Christian Dalits are included in the scheduled caste list. By the way, they are included in the ST list. Suppose if they are included in the scheduled caste list, what would happen? It would really have an impact on their lives? I don't think so, because the number of, remember, this entire debate is very, very interesting. That what is the attitude of those communities who are the beneficiary of the reservation in this category called SC? They are very critical of the opening up of this. And because we are in an environment where Dalit Muslim unity is always celebrated, we actually ignore the argument made by the Dalit leadership. They are very critical of actually opening up of this category called SC. So therefore, the actual politics must be seen through the prism of political economy of affirmative action.
Yeah, thanks. Moving on to your discussion with regard to
how long we are going to continue with this?
It's usually we have 2 hours of session, but author will be speaking for 1 hour, and then we will be having question answers. So we will take another 2 questions, and then we will conclude.
Because I am tired now.
Yeah. So with regard to that, you have said that Hindutva is engaging with the constitution. And if I am correct, the Haryana Legislative Assembly has passed a bill giving reservation in the private sector, and also giving reservation to the region specific. That was something new that was happening. So how do you see that now reservation debate is being shifted from the social exclusion and backwardness to the regional, or I should say federal structure. Because here in Telangana, the whole issue was with regard to that there cannot be a reservation to the jobs within the state. There can be a reservation if someone goes to Punjab and he can apply for that. Within a state, there cannot be reservation. An Andhra person and Telangana person are equal. There cannot be a reservation, or they should be treated equally. But now Haryana government is bringing a new perspective to this reservation policy. Is that you mean? Do you mean that constitutional engagement, dealing or engaging with the constitution? Is this what you mean by engaging with the constitution?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is a very good question, by the way. And this is what I indicated in my paper, that the use of the engaging with the constitution to, look at the statement made by the minister of welfare with regard to such a commission in the parliament in the last 7 years. Such a commission report is still recognized as a reference point for doing affirmative action for Muslim. Or in all 7 or 8 years, government actually filed a report to the parliament that how far they have taken to the recommendation of such a commission, except two. One is the opening up of the SC category. They are critical of that and they do not accept it. Second is that no, that's the only point. That's the only point where they are not agree with the such a commission report, that there should be the SC category should be opened up to include Dalit Muslims and Dalit Christian. And what is interesting is, on the one hand, there is a recognition of all other recommendation made by the such a commission in the parliament by the BJP government. On the other hand, when it comes to the question of reservation and affirmative action, specifically addressing the needs of Muslims as a category, the response of the state is, in last 7 years, is that the purpose of reservation is to reform Hinduism. And these are not my words. These are not my words. So I think that if this interpretation, that the purpose of affirmative action in the country is to reform Hinduism, is accepted, then there would be a serious problem. Now, this is up, and that's why this is not a question. It will become a Muslim question if we reduce everything to the 1950 order. But this is up to the Dalit leadership and up to the other non-Muslim group to raise this issue, that what is the nature of secular affirmative action that is there in the constitution. What is the philosophy of reservation in Indian constitution? I think if we approach this question from this vantage point, then we will be also engaging with the constitution in a different way.
Thanks a lot. So we take another question and then we will wind up. Just I am giving a final call to the audience. If you have any last question.
All male, no female?
There are female. There are female.
But they won't, why they are not asking questions?
Up to them.
No, I'm just joking. I am not a person who would actually force people to ask. They're up to them whether they would like to ask or not.
I think in all of our previous sessions, this was highly technical and also at the same time kind of technical and also complex. That makes our audience a bit difficult to find.
And politically incorrect. No, actually, what I observe in many of the questions is that, and this is the problem, and I would like to reiterate my reflection on that, is basically that we are accustomed of hearing the things which we like. And we are somehow reduced, and I'm including myself in that. When I say we, meaning I'm also included in this way, that we have reduced everything to the dominant discourse, and this is the first point which I made in my presentation, that I am not going to I'm not going to rely my explanation on the given template that is established there. We know that anti-Muslim discourse is the most dominant reference point for contemporary politics. We know that Hindutva narrative is the dominant narrative. So if we actually get to hear, when we hear these things, some way or the other, we feel that my anxiety is reflected by the presenter. But suppose someone like me who does not look at these things in black and white and want to expand the scope of this, look at things in a different light and from a different vantage point, somehow it makes us think. So if those of you who have not yet answered, or those of you who are actually critical to my position, I think that would also be a feedback for me. Because if something that is not there, not new, but something that is different is established, and we all engage with that, it is also a beginning of alternative thinking, in my view.
Yeah.
Because I was invited in a seminar like your organization in some setting, and it was a very Muslim sort of thing, and they asked me what to do, and I said that I can't answer this, but as a practicing Muslim, I would say make duas. So they were laughing. Now, when we raise this question of morality, see, if I say, okay, do something called political morality, etc., or construct an alternative morality, okay, fine, that is also acceptable. But suppose, as a practicing Muslim, I would say that this is the time we just sit down and think critically what is bad with our society and make duas. I'm a believer in Allah. So they were actually laughing. And I actually get this impression that,
Should I not read it as an escapism?
No, I was actually surprised, because for me, whenever as a Muslim, I also feel these things which all of us are feeling at the moment, like hijab thing and namaz thing. Namaz is very central to my identity. I offer 5 times a day namaz since very early from my life. And whenever I visited, my first trip outside Delhi was Haridwar with my friends. And we offered namaz in temples, etc. Everybody happy and things like that. I wrote a piece, a newspaper article on that. Now, that is something which is affecting me. So when I notice that, and when I don't have any answer to that, I would just sit down and make dua that Allah actually show me the right path. This is my way of,
So
reducing my
are
anxieties.
we not discussing the thing that that is Muttahida Qawmiyat, or I should say that was there in 1920s and 1930s, and those who stayed back are still attached to that concept of Muttahida Qawmiyat. And yes, it was valid when the Congress was also there in support of that.
It's still
At
there.
this point of time, how do you see that? Again, in a way, you are trying to invoke the same perspective of Muttahida Qawmiyat, and let's cherish that. That is accepted. But the other end should be there to take care of others.
No, but I think I cannot expect others to take me. I won't give up my Muslim identity. My Muslim identity will always be remain, and I cherish this identity. And I'm not forcing others to actually, embrace me, and in order to make India perfect a secular country. For me, I think the question is not that. As a Muslim, I also feel that in my country, there are a lot of people who are poor and marginalized. And these policies which are being implemented by the government in the name of Hindu-Muslim divide is basically depriving many of my countrymen. So as a Muslim, I feel bad. And as that, if that is my nationalism, that is perfectly fine. But by the way, it's not Muttahida Qawmiyat. It's different. And we need a new word. to construct this. And we have, credible survey. I was part of Pew survey, not merely the CSDS survey, which we usually do. In Pew survey, this thing also come up quite radically, that India belongs to all. And people of this country would say that if a person is not merely respecting his or her religion, but also other religions, he or she cannot be a religious person at all. And these are not my words. This is a finding of a survey conducted by Pew in India, and the sample size of that survey was 35,000. And it covers the entire country. So it means that, we should not see things from the prism of this Hindu-Muslim divide. We should actually go back. So my namaz, I know that many people won't actually come forward and protect my namaz. Obviously, they are not like that. But it does not mean that, the kind of acceptance for my Islam is declining. I don't think I have great belief in that, defining feature of Indian identity. And India cannot become Israel, by the way. India cannot become Israel. India cannot become Israel.
What we didn't expect, everything is happening. What we didn't expected is everything happening. So
yeah, certainly everything is happening.
That is not expected from the side of the Muslims.
No one can stop you. No one can stop you to think positively. Obviously, bad things are happening. Bad things are certainly happening. But if you actually go back to your basics, go back to the fundamental, first is that you just think closely that whatsoever is given to me, I'm not going to accept, and start afresh. That is that's the solution. Don't, the first thing is, and, Sudipto Kaviraj writes in his, one of his essays on nationalism, and his argument is, which is a very important argument. He says that the best thing to interpret a discourse is to get rid of the history which is given to it by itself. Suppose nationalism would define itself as nationalism. So if you just mistrust that explanation and look at it, rather critically, you would be in a position to find new meanings of that. And because the kind of issues we are encountering are existential, so therefore there is a need to be critical, and there to meet not merely critical but creative, constructively creative. This is missing, by the way.
Thank you.
I think
Abdul Khadir, we will conclude that.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. After that, we will conclude the session.
Please, yeah.
Hello. Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah,
yes, you are. Yes.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
It was nice to hear you, Hilal Ahmed ji. This is Abdul Qadir. I am a software developer, but by nature I am a human being first. Okay, that's everyone. We should think that आपने जैसे कहा है कि I will tell in Hindi rather than speak in English. I may not get because I'm not from politically kind of background. मतलब यानी constitutions के बारे में मुझे पता नहीं, लेकिन थोड़ा basic तो पता है. मतलब बेसिक यानी इन द सेंस की यूनिटी जो भी है, पॉलिटिकल यूनिटी होती है, पॉलिटिकल ये टाइप की सिविलाइजेशन के लिए भी बात की है हम लोगों ने. लेकिन आपने जो कहा है आई टोटली एग्री. वी नीड अल्टरनेटिव थिंकिंग कि हम एक ही प्रिज्म से नहीं देख सकते. हम जो चश्मा लगाए हैं वही चश्मा नहीं, चश्मा उतार के देखो. जो चश्मा है तुम्हारे पास, वो चश्मा उतार के देखो तो आपको कैसा दिखेगा. सब अल्लाह के बंदे हैं सब, यानी ये ह्यूमैनिटी है. तो आपको पहले ह्यूमन बनना पड़ेगा दिल से. उसके बाद में जो है ना, by fate we got become मोमिन, अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह, but we have been landed to in a different country which is we are not practicing. They are anti kind of thing.
Sir, please come to the question. That will be a better thing.
मेरा क्वेश्चन कुछ भी नहीं है. Just I am not logical person who's asking a question, but I am a person. Logical means I am a thinker, a true believer. I will टोटली एग्री विद हिलाल सर कि भाई दुआ करो. आप खुद दुआ नहीं करो तो कम से कम जो है आप जो है ना प्रैक्टिकल मुस्लिम बन के प्रैक्टिस करके बताओ, जैसा कि इन्होंने बताया है कि कहीं हरिद्वार या कहीं, मैं भी वैसी किसी एक नरसिम्हा स्वामी के टेम्पल में या कहीं जाके मैं भी नमाज पढ़ा, लोगों ने हलचल हो गई लोगों के अंदर कि नमाज ये बंदा कहाँ पढ़ रहा है बोल के। तो क्या हो गया, लोग मेरे बाजू जो बोल, अरे यह कहाँ पढ़ लिया तूने नमाज। लेकिन मेरे दिल में कुछ खौफ भी नहीं था, कि सारे दिनों के लोगों में खौफ था, मेरे दिल में कुछ खौफ नहीं था, नमाज पढ़ लिया अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह अल्लाह के फजल से। तो आप जो बिना खौफ के आप अल्लाह के खालिक से इबादत करोगे, तो लोगों की किस बात की खौफ हमें? ये तो
नहीं,
ये रिवोल्यूशन टाइप आनी
ये
चाहिए।
सिर्फ यही बात नहीं है, बल्कि ये भी है कि अगर आप वाकई में मतलब जो लोग मजहबी लोग हों या नहीं हों, इस मुल्क में कम से कम इतना तो है कि अगर आप कोई मजहबी इबादत कर रहे हैं तो लोग, जो आम लोग हैं, वो उसकी इज्जत करते हैं। तो यही हमारे साथ में भी हुआ हमेशा, और कभी मतलब इनकरेजमेंट ही मिला हमेशा नमाज पढ़ने पर। जितने भी मेरे दोस्त हैं जो कि मुसलमान नहीं हैं, उन्होंने हमेशा इनकरेज किया, उन्होंने हमेशा इस बात के लिए उत्साह बढ़ाया, और उन्होंने अपने घर, अपने मंदिर हमें दिए हैं नमाज पढ़ने के लिए। तो यही तो हिंदुस्तान है। तो मुझे लगता है कि हमें इस चीज को दोबारा लाना चाहिए। देर इज अनदर रिक्वेस्ट इन द चैट बॉक्स. This is actually quote by Shripto Kaviraj, and he says that the best approach to understand a discourse is to have a distrust on the history which this discourse gives to itself. So at the moment, the dominant discourse is the discourse of Hindutva. So I think if we really would like to understand it, we need to get rid of the justification and the history that this Hindutva discourse gives to itself.
Indeed, this was, I think you have concluded.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It was
This was a
nice.
great session.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and
Yeah.
hope to see you all soon.
Thanks
Khuda.
a lot. Yeah, we conclude the session here.
Yeah, thank you. Khuda.